Hello, Internet. This is Daniel with Driving and Dragons. Today, I'm going to do a quick reaction video to Condor DM and his experience doesn't matter. You were only as good as your last session rant. I'm calling it a rant because he is apparently poised for another one of his vocal disagreements. But we'll see what we have here. I'm not going to say that Condor has never had a um, good take or a good piece of advice. There have been some times I've agreed with him. A lot of times I've agreed with him, but I have come to notice that he likes to see insult and take offense where there really shouldn't be any, and he kind of goes off the deep end a lot. But we're going to go ahead and take a look and see what he has to say here.
Imagine that you're an old school tabletop role-playing game player, dungeon master, whatever you call yourself. And you come out and you tell people, experience doesn't matter. You're only as good as your last session.
So stopping right there, you can see he's already in a very defensive posture. Whatever you call yourself, you're an OSR DM or whatever you say. And imagine you say this. Well, that statement, depending on context, is actually very true. But let's see where he goes with it and what he's got to say as far as you're only as good as your last session, what he's going to take from it, and where he's going to get his meaning.
Are you telling me that somebody who's only maybe ran the game for about a year or a few months can pick up all the knowledge that somebody would pick up after playing for 10 years with multiple different people?
No, that's not what anybody is saying by that. That's not what experience doesn't matter means in any context. Now, if you have a prodigy who, for instance, knows all the rules backwards and forward, has a ton of charisma, is just a very gifted storyteller, very gifted game crafter, knows how to run things just naturally, because there are people who are naturally more talented than others, then yeah, your experience doesn't matter as much as your results. But in general, no, they're not saying that that somebody who's got a lot of experience is necessarily, they're not saying that's meaningless.
Are you telling me we can be on the same level? Know all the same things? That the experience doesn't matter. Only my last session matters.
Now, you see right there, he just did a little bit of a turn of phrase, and I'm going to try and stop less because we're only 39 seconds in here. But you notice he does that little switch there. That my experience doesn't matter, that you can know all the same things, that it jumps, that it's only as good as your last session, and it doesn't matter if I know all these things and you don't. Well, it depends on the context in which it's being said. Yeah, somebody with a lot less experience could know a tremendous amount more than you. Your experience, the amount of time you put in, doesn't matter. What matters is the quality of work that comes out the other side. But you'll notice that he kind of flipped the script there a little bit to go back to imply that what you're really attacking is that experience has no value, not that experience doesn't matter in a specific context, when that's not what's being said by anybody who says that.
The decades in the hobby mean nothing. The decades and numerous amounts of games and all the different people you had the experience with, you're not learning stuff that, are you telling me that somebody that can get in the hobby for a few months, they can just pick up all that, right? So the experience doesn't matter, and then only their last session really does, because that's the only way that would work. You'd have to devalue the experience, say that it brings you nothing. Well, then your last session really does count as the important detail. Well, if not, even if you drop the ball in the last session, if experience matters, it doesn't matter that you had a bad session. The experience overall is going to be important for all the sessions going forward and the many good sessions you had before you drop the ball. So your last session means nothing. It doesn't matter what happens in the last session. It's what you do going forward that matters. And if you carry a bunch of experience with you, that journey is going to be different. It could be better in many ways, right? It's going to be an overall different experience than somebody who right now might be only in the first year of what they're doing. So experience does matter, and it matters more than your last session.
You see, he's drawing a black and white here. He's drawing an either or when it's not really an either or, and he's drawing an absolutism. So experience doesn't matter. You're only as good as your last session. Does not mean that there's no value to experience. Does not mean that experience is irrelevant. And he's defining it in a way that takes it totally out of context with what that means. The expression, your experience doesn't matter. You're only as good as your last whatever. You're only as good as your, like in sales, we say, your history doesn't matter. You're only as good as your last month. You're only as good as your last deal. What that really means is that it means a couple of different things. One is, it doesn't matter how great you are to the person that you're running, in this case, running the game for. So for instance, I sit down with new players and I go in and I start to run a game and I do a terrible job. It doesn't matter to them how many sessions I've run, how many years I've been a dungeon master or a game master, how well I know rules or systems, or really even how great most of my games have been. When I have an off night on that night, that's all that matters to them. My experience doesn't matter. I'm just as good as the last session I ran for. And it's a way of thinking that's often used in things like professional sports, where it's like, it doesn't matter what your batting average is. It matters what happened last time you stepped up to the plate. It matters what happens this time at the plate. It is more of a mentality of going into than coming out of. When I'm stepping out of the on deck circle into the batter's box, it doesn't matter what happened with my experience. It doesn't matter how great of a batter it is. It only matters what I do with the pitches that are thrown to me in that instance. And if you go in as a game master or a dungeon master saying, it doesn't matter how great I think I am as a game master or how many sessions I've run, if I'm focused on my last session, which is the one that I'm running right now, that makes you a better game master. And there's some truth to both sides of that coin. One is coming into it and thinking that way, and the other is understanding that it doesn't matter what you say. It matters what people see, and people see the most recent thing. So you got to stay on your toes. With Condor, he likes to harp about 1,000 games that he ran in like the early 90s. And congratulations, you ran 1,000 games in 3 years, which means you played 6.5 sessions a week. This is a tremendous amount of play. But that doesn't matter. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't matter if you were a great dungeon master or you ran all these public games. You could have run great games from 1990 to 2015 and then on and therefore. But if all you've done is piss off all your players since then your experience doesn't matter. You're only as good as what you've done recently. Now, he's correct in the fact that you can adjust and adapt and overcome, and that as a game master, you should think back and say, look, the last session, just because I bombed the last session doesn't mean I'm suddenly a bad game master. I can adapt and move forward. It doesn't mean I'm crap all of a sudden. But that's not the context in which that expression is typically used. So I believe this is once again where somebody brought something up in a specific context, and he is intentionally ignoring the context in order to make a particular point. I'd like to see whatever conversation spawned this particular topic, because I'd be happy to be proven wrong, but it's been my experience that that's not the case.
It is one thing if the statement is coming from a nobody, somebody who doesn't have much influence. But imagine if you looked at the old school part of the tabletop role-playing game hobby online, and the person making the statement is somebody who's prominent in that section. Like they have a decently, large following. Not a massive one, don't get me wrong. It's no Matt Colville. But they definitely have influence. They have sway. And here they are telling new players coming into the hobby and other people, that experience and what you're doing doesn't matter. Only your last session matters. Like, I get maybe if you're not thinking about it, that sounds like an intelligent statement, maybe. But the second you think about it, you realize that is one of the dumbest fucking statements you could ever make, ever. And it shows a lack of wisdom. And to me, it shows that you're probably deceitful because you probably haven't not thought it over. Obviously, you haven't.
I don't think Condor has thought this over. I think he has had a knee-jerk reaction and then done everything he can to justify what he's saying about this, because it absolutely does matter. Once again, context is key in this particular situation. Absolutely, you should be telling new players coming in that experience doesn't matter. You're only as good as your last session, because that is a tool. It's not saying that your last session is what dictates everything you are as a game master. But the fact of the matter is that you don't want new players coming into the hobby thinking that they have to have all this experience in order to be a decent game master. At the end of the day, if everybody at your table is having a good time and is enjoying the game, you're a good game master. Whether you have one session of experience or 100 sessions or 1,000 sessions or 1,000,000 sessions, whether you've been playing as a game, whether you've been running games for a week or running games since the mid-70s, if the people at the table are doing well, your experience is irrelevant. You're a good game master if the people at your table are enjoying what you're doing. And the sad thing is that Condor has said this exact same thing in previous videos. He has said before that if what you're doing at your table works good for your table, then you're doing it right. And that is the truth. You know, I am by no means some rules is written purist who seems to think that what's in the book is the only thing that matters. But what you got here is Condor completely forgetting that because he has gotten hung up on what he is perceiving as an attack against his experience. And it's just not correct, because the only way his argument makes sense, he wants to talk about you're fucking this and you're not intelligent and you're a fucking idiot and this is the dumbest fucking thing you can say and that sort of thing. But the only way his point of view that he's making works is if you strip this of context and take it to an illogical extreme that nobody means when they say it. Nobody ever says experience doesn't matter, you're only as good as your last session in the context with the severity in which he is trying to define it to make his argument. What he's basically doing is somebody said this, he had a knee-jerk reaction to it, and now he's strawmanning it in order to make his point seem stronger than it really is. And it's really sad because, like I said, there's some good points in here, and he's actually blowing through a lot of good points he's made in the past in order to try and make himself correct in this, and he's just not.
You're saying it to sound intelligent because maybe you think it sounds intelligent. But no, experience does matter more than your last session. There's all kinds of sessions where you fall on your face or you do really good. That experience is always going to be important no matter what, right? You can always recover from a bad session, but you can't just pick up 10 years of experience in a few months. So that's why the experience overall is always going to be more valuable than just some random session within all the sessions that you're playing or running. Now, imagine that me, Condor DM, I talk about my experience in the hobby in some of my videos. I talk about the importance of experience in the hobby. Now, imagine you want to bring me down. You want to degrade what I'm saying. You want to say that my experience means nothing. So you make this really unwise statement. In a desperate...
There you go. That's the home run right there, is that you can tell right there, this is a defense mechanism, knee-jerk reaction, where he is taking this statement as an attack against him. Now, somebody may have said this. He may have come out and said something and been like, I've run all these sessions and I've got all this experience and this is why I'm right. And they turned around and said, hey, man, experience doesn't matter. You're only as good as your last session. And they're not saying it to say that experience has no value. They're not saying it to say that, your last session is the be all and end all of everything. They're saying it to basically point out the idea that it's like, look, dude, your experience doesn't matter. If you're wrong, you're wrong. I had a very, very humorous situation happen at work one day years ago. I was helping out with a roofing crew, and there's this young guy, and there's an old man up on the roof. This guy's probably 40, 50 years old. And I guess I shouldn't say old. That's barely older than me. But he was 40, 50 years old, been roofing since he was 18, and he's up there laying shingle. And this young guy who's maybe 20, he was about my age at the time, he calls it, he's like, hey, man, if you do it this way, it's a little bit faster. Let me show you. And the guy called down. He said, I've been roofing for 30 years. You can't tell me nothing. He said, just because you've been roofing wrong for 30 years doesn't suddenly make your way better. And of course, that man came down off of that. I didn't think that as much as he smoked and drank and as bad a health as he was in, that he could come down that ladder that fast. But there was a brawl on the job site at that point. But that's the kind of thing. You got Condor who will come out and say something and hide behind the facile argument of his experience as if it's the be all end all. And somebody comes back and rebuts that with a very common saying. And his response is to dig into that and go after it. You can tell that this is coming from a feeling of personal attack. He just flat out said it. Imagine you're me and you have all this experience and somebody says this to you and I take personal offense. And then instead of somebody saying, hey, this is the context, or thinking about it, it's you can't readjust his stance. He won't readjust and say, oh, you know what? I didn't think about it that way, or you're right in that context, or maybe that's not what it is. It's immediately, no, let's straw man this out. Let's pull this out into the most literal meaning we can possibly make for the sole purpose of this rant video to try and make my position more correct than it actually is.
Attempt to bring me down, to degrade me. But of course, you haven't thought it over. And it's a very unwise statement the second anyone examines what you said. Do you know what I call that? Condor DM derangement syndrome. Where I say something and people are desperate to bring me down for whatever reason. They're mad at me for something else I said. And they'll make this desperate, effort to come up with something to degrade me, only to end up being foolish because what they're saying is going to be wrong. And they're going to hear that from other people. They're probably going to hear it from me. And then they're going to look like idiots. And that person better hope that you don't figure out who it is, right? Because I'm not going to give a name, but I am going to give a response because I want to make this clear. This might be an individual that triggered this video, but he's not the first person to say this. So I am responding to the variety of people that have this opinion. So I know many people will think this video might be targeted at them because they had the opinion I'm speaking about. Anyway, for now, take care. You know what you...
So it's actually kind of funny. I mean, there's a level of egotism that comes with Condor that's kind of amusing. He acts like all these people really, really like care about his opinion and care about him personally, that these things are, that everything's directed at him. He comes into conversations with a massive, massive chip on his shoulder, and other people just kind of brush him aside. I've seen it happen. I mean, it's even happened in situations where he was approached very respectfully, and that chip on his shoulder just gets in his way. And when he eventually gets a dismissive response or like a dude, whatever, he then turns around and, he gets this idea in his head that because he disagrees with them and it must be that none of them understand him, that none of them get his great genius, and that they all look stupid for disagreeing with him. And the second you take 4 seconds to look at anything he said, and what they said against him, they realize that they're dumbasses. And it's like, no, this ain't how you win friends and influence people. That's for sure. This is not a situation where he's really going to get his message across, except to a very small few. And it's generally going to be people who are already mad at whoever he happens to be mad at. If he really wants to be an ambassador for the game, and for the hobby, he really needs to take a step back and not be so thin-skinned. Because this whole video was basically him taking a relatively common statement that is very context dependent. It can have a few different meanings based on context, extrapolating it into a very extreme form of literalism to make himself right, and then he applies that definition back to everybody who's ever said it to him to make himself look like he's better. And it's hilarious because he gets so angry at all these people who quote unquote say, tear him down to make themselves look better, tear him down to prop themselves up. And that's literally what he's doing in this video to whoever he's going up against. So I don't know who he's talking to. I know that he's wrong in this case. He's just objectively wrong. This is clearly a straw man. There's some good points that he makes in here because they're really just the most basic of basic points that are kind of indisputable. But that's kind of become his MO, is to take something, stretch it out to this literal extreme, take his arguments and base them around just the most basic of bare bones, indisputable facts, and then turn around and make whatever the other person said a personal attack, as well as a extreme literalist version of something they said that's been really warped so far beyond context that it doesn't matter. I'd be happy to be proven wrong if there's screenshots of some conversation somewhere where his straw man actually has a name, but then he never talks about who he's talking to. He never gives names. So you can't go back and see what the context is. I think that's a big part of it, is he never names names, and he tries to hold that up as some higher mighty thing. Like somehow I find it really funny because he'll say, like, I'm not going to tell my 400 subs about, because it might benefit this guy with 40,000 subs. The guy with 40,000 subs doesn't need your help getting subs, Condor. But the reason, whether you realize it or not, that you won't name these people's names is because you don't want other people going back, seeing the argument you got in, seeing the discussion thread, and realizing, wait a second, that's not at all what these people said or meant. You're pulling this into where the only thing you have to argue against is the straw man. And it's really, like I said, it's a real shame, because there is some good knowledge and some good experience and some good information that you can pull from Condor. He has some positions that I think are actually the way things should go and are far better than what you see, especially out of like the Bro SR and out of the OSR movement. But he is so hell-bent on these people that he thinks are out to get him that his good stuff gets buried in his desperate need to kick back and somehow win the fight against people when he just can't back up and look at some context. Well, anyway, guys, that's it for my first reaction video. Throw a like, a share, and subscribe, and throw a comment down below on some other stuff we might want to react to, or if you even like reactions. I think I'm going to try and do more reactions to older stuff for some of the bigger channels, game reviews that are not necessarily game reviews, but like a RPG philosophy type stuff, and DMing and game master tips and that sort of thing. Try and focus more on the older stuff, but I think I'll do a couple of reactions to some of these hot takes too. Or if you think reactions are kind of a waste of time and stupid, let me know about that too. But anyway, see you guys next time.